Before I open it up for questions, probably most of you have seen the promotional material in the back of the room. It's for tapes and books and things like that. But one thing that I did want to draw your attention to is we have a nonprofit foundation called Botanical Dimensions, which is the political real-world action group that I am associated with. And what we do, we have a 19-acre botanical garden in Hawaii, and we collect plants with a history of shamanic usage in the warm tropics, especially South America, and bring those plants to Hawaii and maintain the living plants and a database about them, looking toward the day when research will be possible on these things, or looking toward the day when someone will wish to do research on these things. And it might be looking towards some future change of heart in society. It might be studies with human beings, or it might be simply studies to chemically characterize the constituents of these plants, or it might be anthropological consolidation of field data, or something like that. Far more quickly than the rainforests of the world are being cleared, the knowledge of what plants in those rainforests can be used for is being lost. The World Wildlife Foundation, Earth First, and these kinds of organizations preserve large tracts of jungle, and this is very commendable work, but nobody is working to preserve human information gathered over the millennia by these native peoples. And the people themselves are feeling the full impact of 20th century civilization. The men are not learning the old shamanic ways. They're learning to be outboard motor mechanics and tour guides and to work in sawmills and this sort of thing. So in the next 25 years, really, if this information and these plant species are not preserved, a heritage many millennia old will be lost. And so I want to call your attention to that work. We do accept donations and support, and the information is in the back of the room. Okay, to my mind, the most fertile part of these things is the question and answer exchange, because this is, I think, an exercise in building a community of understanding. There are no experts in this field, in the field of psychedelic exploration. My own degrees I regard as a joke, and it isn't the academics who have the leg up. It's the people who have the experience who have the leg up. And academics are often the last people to fear disgracing themselves in the presence of their colleagues and endangering their tenure. So, having said that, questions? Yes, sir.
It made me very curious when you condemn, very rightfully condemn racism, and then sort of offhandedly kind of praise the Nazis in the same talk.
Well, I didn't praise them. I said that part of the archaic revival, that they had exemplified a certain facet of it. Let me be more explicit. Hitler, one of the things that he did was he felt the exhaustion of Christian values. He felt Christian values to be bourgeois. So he tried to enkindle an interest in the Nordic, pre-Christian Nordic myths. And the Hitlerjugend were always going off to sing folk songs around the campfire and press wildflowers and learn about these great traditions. I think that fascism is a definite shadow aspect of the archaic revival. And one of the things that's made me less than welcome in some of the temples of the New Age has been my willingness to condemn gurus. whom I see basically as just the whole institution is counterproductive. It's not that some gurus are good and some are bad. It's that the whole notion is flawed because it makes the assumption that somebody knows something and somebody doesn't. And the truth is we're sort of all in it together. So if the archaic revival is to be implemented, vigilance against fascist expressions of it, I think, should be very much in the forefront. Fortunately, we're not there yet, so I don't have to, by name, indicate the nests of fascist tendencies that have been located in it. But certainly I think the guru thing has not served well and is not empowering to the kind of Greek ideals, and by that I mean democratic ideals, that I think will ultimately be centerpieced in any kind of reasonable archaic revival. Yeah, back here.
Do you have any knowledge of the psychoactive plants that the Yoruba tradition uses in Nigeria?
The Yoruba tradition in Nigeria, what psychoactive plants does it use? I haven't written about it. I've looked into it a good deal. Africa is an interesting situation, and this is the kind of thing we'll discuss in the weekend. We'll go continent by continent, drug and plant complex by drug plant complex, and talk about them. The major psychedelic in Africa known to Western science is ibogaine, which is the active indole alkaloid constituent of Tabernantha iboga, which is a small tree or bush of tropical West Africa that is aphrodisiac, psychedelic, and highly psychoactive. Now, the interesting thing about iboga is that there's absolutely no record of its use before about 1850. And one would assume that this thing was in use for millennia, and yet absolutely no convincing record of it exists. Africa, the continent of human origins, is surprisingly poor in psychedelic plants. Is that because of faunal constraints having to do with soil factors? Or is it have to do with the fact that Africa is an extremely human-impacted environment? Burning and gathering of plants has been going on there for a long time. Well, we don't know. The particular tradition that you talked about claims knowledge of several psychoactive plants not known to Western science. This is exactly the kind of area then that our organization, Botanical Dimensions, would investigate. We want to listen to these people, hear them out as to what plants they think do what things and have what effects, and then collect these plants and subject them to rigorous scientific analysis and characterization. I think there's a great deal of work to be done in the field in Africa. And one of the things that you will hear me say in the course of this weekend is to indicate interesting problems for students looking for doctoral dissertations or field projects, because the great scandal of psychedelic research is that there ain't any, that it has been driven underground, that people do not do the work, and consequently this is a working definition of suppression of knowledge. You know, you do not fund the projects, you do not publish the papers, you do not promote the researchers who do the work, and suddenly the entire field of knowledge is discredited or ultimately abandoned and forgotten. Back here.
About having the courage to move ahead into these areas where we're experiencing cultural development being really perverted.
And it seems that the people that are having the courage to move ahead are the first ones to encounter the shadow side of the very organizations that are perverting the culture. Could you say something about how to prepare, how to provide some kind of support system for people that do go out in these spaces and encounter the shadow side of the very imbalances that we're trying to heal?
Well, I think that cultural development cannot proceed faster than the development of language, and that in fact cultural development is the fallout from advances in the evolution of language. What I am trying to do, and what I urge other people to do, is create a common language about this stuff. Occasionally I have the experience, after giving a particularly wide-ranging talk on this subject, of having someone come up to me afterwards and say, "I thought I was crazy till I heard you speak. And now I realize other people know these things too." Okay, this phrase, "I thought I was crazy," means I thought no one understood me. I thought there was no commonality of language. But hearing you speak, I understand that there is a commonality of language. So I think that building a support system for the exploring and pioneering class among us means building a common language about these experiences. I have seen this go on over the past 25 years because I was fortunate enough to be at the center of the psychedelic thing, or at a center of the psychedelic thing, throughout much of its evolution. And I remember in 1965, when Sandoz LSD was released everywhere, basically, but was much in evidence on the Berkeley campus. Yes, we took LSD, but it was in between the trips. You would just feel out into the environment and say, what is different? And the answer was, everything is changing. I am changing. The people around me are changing. The culture is changing. The flux was almost palpable. This was because a set of new linguistic modalities were being put in place. And however much they may be derided as cliches, they actually have given permission for new kinds of relating between people. So notions like ego trip, before that, you had to explain to people what an ego trip was, and then once they got it, they behaved much better. It was like a sudden rise to a new level of sensitivity vis-a-vis the matter of what is couth. People had been getting away with all kinds of psychic sloppiness to which they were suddenly held account. So I think really the task of building community is the task of building language. And of course, the more community, the more verbal interaction, the more language. The more people who have these experiences and feed them back into the collectivity with their conclusions, the more there is a basis for understanding. And it's surprisingly specific. Once after a talk, a woman came up to me, and many people were waiting to talk, and she waited, and then she came, and she was very shy, and she said, "Do you ever have problems with pterodactyls?" And I said very nicely that no, I never had a problem. Well, it wasn't a week until I had a tremendous problem with one. I realized that, this is what this woman was talking about. And, so in a way, she empowered my unconscious to lead me into that place. And so stifling discussion about psychedelics is the most detrimental thing that can be done. I mean, we really need to tear the lid off this, if not to do it, at least to talk about it. And I think that will then create the climate where more serious things can be done. Further back.
What was your problem with the pterodactyl?
What was my problem with pterodactyls? Someone fishing for a story. Well, I had taken some mushrooms, and I was waiting for them to come on, and it was about the 50-minute mark, and it was beginning to come on, and its typical form of presentation is it has this kind of octopoid or silk scarf-like quality where it just falls upon you as though from the ceiling, and then you're enveloped in it, and you mustn't struggle, you must just observe. And I was sort of to that place with it, and suddenly there was a feeling of retraction, and like cold air was how I described it to myself. And the dog next door, who had never before howled, in fact, I didn't know there was a dog next door, suddenly howled. And this feeling of coldness and retraction and the howling dog, and I sort of sat up and said, that's funny. And at that moment, the crossbeam, which was a few feet above my head, gave a groan, as with the sound of leathery wings, something settled apparently onto the roof of my house. And I was completely flabbergasted. To the point where I was not even alarmed. It was more like, come on, you know? And so I just sat with it for about 15 seconds, and then I directed my attention through the roof at whatever was there, and said something which seemed odd to me to say. I said, "Begone! Can't you see that I am in conversation with an elder?" And I had never ever before actually referred to the mushroom as an elder. This thing just sort of came out of my mouth. And there was a kind of a standoff, a feeling of standoff. And then the beam groaned, and I heard the beat of leathery wings, and this thing went away. And later I saw this woman again, the one who had asked the question, and I said, I didn't understand what you meant about the pterodactyls, but then I had this experience. And I said, my impression was that they're very stupid. And she said, yes, they're very stupid, but when the doorway is opening, they come and stand around. And that's exactly what it was. Okay, so then you turn this over to a straight therapist or something, and they say, you know, this is clearly an antediluvian projection from the collective. Well, I don't know. It does seem as though there are forces and powers which haunt these other realms where one is much wiser to simply go with tradition and find out, you know, what's going on. There are apparently dumb spirits or dumb forces which hang around with which you must deal sternly. Now, I don't claim that this is true. I only describe operational experiences because I have no patience with table knocking. I regard undrugged channeling as a manifestation of mental illness. The tide must be turning on that issue. I used to get booed for saying that. Back here. In the Rainbow Beret.
You've spoken a lot about the evolution of consciousness and the role that psychedelic drugs have played, specifically within primate evolution. I'm curious as to how the psychoactively induced experiences of apes are possibly transmitted and contributing to the evolution of consciousness. Could you?
You mean, how did it happen?
Right.
Is that your question? Well, the pivotal part of the argument, aside from visual acuity, increased interest in sex, and all that, was language. That and this is not well understood, and because we're not allowed to do research, we're not likely to understand it for a while. But notice that I have engaged my mind to my audial mechanism, and that what I'm doing is I'm making small mouth noises. And you are looking in a dictionary, which you have learned and keep in your head, to decode these small mouth noises that I'm making. Now, the assumption operating here is that your dictionary and my dictionary are enough alike that you will actually reconstruct my thought by using your dictionary. But it seems to me this is probably a very late developed function of language, and that its original use was to entertain. And that evolution placed a high premium on being able to deliver a string of highly modulated vocal sounds. And the discovery that these vocal sounds could be used to signify objects or intention probably came very late. You probably know about the phenomenon called audial driving, where with drumming you convey yourself or other people into altered states of consciousness. Well, I think drumming is really secondarily powerful in comparison to chanting, and that the repetition of tone and the evolution of mantric sound and the experimentation with acoustically driving the nervous system probably was an early form of entertainment for people. And the fact that on psilocybin, for instance, one can experience synesthesias, see colors, taste sounds, feel idea complexes, made it a form of entertainment. Cognitive activity is what we seem to be set up for. We do it and invent new ways of doing it, and this feedback loop was in place very early, probably before this grassland adaptation began to take place. So in my estimation, it's the impact of the psychedelics primarily on language that drove our ancestors into a category different from that of any other animals that had ever arisen on the earth. And then people say, well, what about dolphins, and what about this? Well, that's very different. I mean, I'm not saying it isn't language, but we really swim in a linguistic ocean. We really do it. And we make artifacts. And by everything we say, do, feel, think, and create, we organize matter and meaning into higher states of itself. This seems to be the psychedelic function happening. Yeah.
And the routine use of psychedelics is to create on some kind of permanent basis an altered state of consciousness. I wonder if you could address any concerns you might have about the effects physiologically, like on the nervous system, and whether there is a price you pay for doing this.
Is there a price to pay? Well, it's a very important question. This is why, and this has again gotten me in trouble in some quarters, I'm a very keen advocate of use of plants rather than drugs, because if you take a plant which has been used shamanically for thousands and thousands of years, the human use trials have been done. We know that it doesn't cause miscarriages, tumors, blindness, ulcers, because people for thousands and thousands of years have been doing this. If, on the other hand, you set out to chemically explore reality and your tools are going to be synthetic drugs, because of the because of the prohibition on legal research into synthetic drugs, we have no data whatsoever on synthetic drugs. The best researched is LSD, because there was some research done before it was made illegal, and we don't have answers to what LSD does, or even if it does anything. The MDA-MDMA family of compounds, no data exists except ex post facto data, now that people are alarmed about it, about what these things do. So when this question that you asked usually comes up in these sessions, and for those of you who've heard me say this before, bear with me, because this is operationally important information that needs to be repeated. It is, if you are seriously considering using the psychedelic experience as an adjunct to spiritual growth, then here are the 3 criteria that you should apply to the tool that you may choose. Does it occur in a plant? If it does, this establishes it as a biological molecule, a thing not unfriendly to life. Molecules like ketamine, you can search the planet from pole to pole and you won't find a ketamine molecule in a naturally evolving system. Okay, so the first criteria is, does it occur in a plant? Second criteria, does it have a history of shamanic usage? Because you can kill yourself with plants. Don't doubt it for a moment. A plant like Strychnos nox vomica or the curare plant, I mean, these things will do you in just like a bullet through the head. So the second criteria is, does it have a history of shamanic usage? It should. That establishes it as a proper vehicle for this kind of work. And then the third and most important category to my mind is, does it bear a reasonable affinity to compounds already present in the ordinary human brain? Now, in other words, is it non-invasive? You don't want to put something into these things cross the blood-brain barrier. They actually go to your brain. You do not want to put something in your brain that has no business being there. So the only way to know if the brain is a friendly environment to a compound is to see if closely related compounds are already comfortably accommodated there. Well, now I've laid these 3 horrendous prohibitions on you. It should occur in a plant. It should have a history of shamanic usage. It should be non-insulting to the brain. But the good news is, the most powerful psychedelics that exist pass all 3 tests. As an example, I will speak of the most powerful psychedelic which exists, which is N,N-dimethyltryptamine. It occurs in the ordinary human brain. Every single one of us has it in our brain at this moment. It's also a Schedule I drug, so that's food for thought.
From the folds in our bed, from the folds in our bed.